Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Deep Dive Podcast. Hope you are doing well and taking good care of yourself. We go beyond the headlines and uncover the truth behind real stories, real crimes, and real consequences. Let's move towards today's topic.
So today we're diving into a case that is, it's just repulsive, but at the same time, brilliantly complex. And I think we need to forget the horror movies for a second. We're really unpacking the reality of H.H. Holmes, his so-called murder castle, and just the terrifying planning that went into it.
That's the real core of this deep dive. The case itself, it runs from about 1861 to 1896.
Right.
So we have to acknowledge that a lot of this history is pieced together from rumors, from police speculation, because the record keeping just wasn't modern.
Of course.
But our mission here is to get past the sensational stuff and really look at the man's intellectual blueprint. I mean, what kind of pathological genius does it take to weaponize architecture, medicine, and insurance law all at once?
Exactly. We're giving you a shortcut through all the sources, tracing Holmes's path from a really difficult, troubled childhood straight to becoming the architect of one of history's most terrifying deceptions. This isn't just about what he did, it's about the cold, step-by-step method of how he pulled it all off.
And to start at the very beginning, we have to look at his birth name, Herman Webster Mudgett. He was born May 16, 1861 in New Hampshire.
And the sources are pretty clear on this. The Mudgett family wasn't poor. His father, Levy, he was a house painter, a trader, a farmer. They were well off financially.
But the home life was, well, it was toxic. Levy was apparently very abusive, and Herman learned early on that you didn't obey out of respect. It was all about absolute fear.
And that kind of profound fear, it led to some extremely disturbing coping mechanisms.
Yeah, the sources really highlight this. Herman developed these unusual habits, like just cutting things, and then, much more disturbingly, torturing and abusing small animals.
He would take them home and cut them up.
Methodically. This tendency toward a detached, almost scientific dissection started incredibly early.
That is a massive, flashing warning sign. And yet his brain, his intellect, it seemed to just cover for it all. He was brilliant in school.
Oh, incredibly. He graduated at 16, which was really young for the time, way ahead of all his peers.
And that success, of course, bred jealousy.
Intense jealousy. And it led to this really pivotal, traumatic moment in his youth. His classmates knew he had this deep, visceral fear of doctors, needles, being held down.
And they used it against him.
They absolutely did. They dragged him into a doctor's office, locked the door, and just left him there.
Wow. And at first he must have been just paralyzed with terror. But the room, it had a full human skeleton in it.
And our sources suggest that once that initial wave of panic was over, Holmes did something really remarkable. He walked over to the skeleton and started meticulously examining it. Every single bone, every joint.
That was a complete flip.
A total transformation. The thing he was most afraid of suddenly became this object of intense intellectual fascination. And that moment right there, that's what set his path. He decided he was going to medical college.
So his pathology, which was driven by the abuse, it fused with this huge intellect, and he found an outlet for it in professional study.
Precisely. And he marries Clara Lovering in 1878. He's only 17 years old.
And the irony here is just so thick. He charmed her by being this brave, soft protector, right? He rescued her from an abusive relationship.
Only to later replicate that abuse himself. They had a son, but by the time he enrolled at the University of Michigan studying medicine and medical drugs, his focus was already warped.
He spent most of his time in the anatomy lab.
Way more than in lectures. He was working under Professor Hardman, who was the lab chief.
And this brings us to his first major criminal enterprise, grave robbing.
Right, and you have to remember the context of the 1880s. There was a huge scarcity of willing donors for anatomical studies. It was a real problem for medical schools.
So Hardman and Holmes, they start collaborating. They're stealing bodies from graves to supply the lab.
It was illicit, sure, but it was kind of common for the time. But Holmes very quickly went beyond just supplying the lab. He was driven by his own macabre fascination and by cold, hard profit.
He started taking extra bodies?
A lot of extra bodies. And this is where that medical knowledge gets weaponized into a tool for fraud. He would mutilate the corpses, cutting off the faces and hands.
And why was that detail so critical?
Because that was his way of creating a truly unidentified body. It was essential for his insurance scheme. He would then assign a new name, a whole fictional identity, to this anonymous corpse.
He'd make up a whole backstory.
A detailed one. He'd choose a religion, and then he would file a fraudulent life insurance claim on this person who never even existed.
Wait a minute, how did he actually get the claim paid out? I mean, without an official identity or a witness to the death, that sounds incredibly complex for that era.
It was complex, and that's exactly why it worked. See, he was exploiting the total lack of standardized IDs. He wasn't claiming that people were just missing. He'd stage an accident scene, or he'd provide some vague story of the death to a small, isolated insurance agent. And removing the faces and hands, that was his guarantee. It meant the body couldn't be traced back to any known missing person. So he was forcing the insurance company to process the claim based on the evidence he provided.
Which was usually a body that was burned or partially dissolved.
Exactly. He was using his anatomy skills to literally erase an identity to make a profit.
He's monetizing death twice. He's selling parts to the college, then claiming insurance on the identity he just destroyed.
And this behavior, as you can imagine, is what ultimately drove Clara to leave him in 1884.
So he just becomes a nomad after that.
Constantly moving, using different aliases, names he'd sometimes reuse later for other scams. And disturbingly, sources mention that during this time he was caught talking to and sometimes abducting small boys off the street. He'd just vanish whenever the local authorities started asking questions.
And this pattern of predation and flight, it just continues until 1886.
When he settles on his final permanent identity.
The famous one, Henry Howard Holmes, H.H. Holmes. He lands in Chicago, gets a job in a drugstore, and with money he'd stolen and saved, he buys the land across the street in 1887 to start building.
And the initial plan was modest, 2 stories for some stores and housing, but it quickly ballooned to 3 stories, with his own heavily secured, isolated space at the top.
It was supposed to be a mix of rentals and commercial space, but that was just the cover story for what would become the murder castle.
The way he built it is just. It's the ultimate example of criminal architectural genius.
He divided the blueprints into all these small, separate segments. Why was that fragmented approach so essential for his plan?
It was all about secrecy, pure risk mitigation. If one person had the entire plan, they could easily expose him.
So by breaking it up, foundation, walls, internal plumbing, he could hire dozens of different contractors.
Dozens. And crucially, he would hire them, let them finish their small part of the job, and then he would systematically refuse to pay them.
Wait, so he was actively using non-payment as a tactic to force them to quit so nobody saw the whole design.
That's how cold it was. It's ruthless efficiency. By the time the next crew came in, the previous work was already sealed up or hidden. No single worker, no plumber, no architect ever understood the whole maze. The strange angles, the stairways to nowhere, and most importantly, the layout of the basement.
And the money for this huge project. Our sources say he seduced a wealthy local investor to fund the whole thing.
Yeah, promised to pay him back as soon as construction was done, which was around 1892.
That repayment never happened, did it?
Nope. As soon as the castle was finished, that investor died suddenly in a pharmacy. The cause of death was failure of the heart.
Convenient.
Very. The sources strongly suggest this was Holmes murdering him to clear the debt and just keep all the money.
So with the building finally complete, he converts the whole upper structure into a hotel.
Right, capitalizing on the massive influx of visitors coming for the World's Fair. He offered incredibly cheap rates.
Which, of course, attracted poor and transient travelers, people arriving at the Chicago port who wouldn't be missed.
And the low prices were justified by the small, windowless rooms. But those rooms weren't small for comfort. They were soundproofed, often vacuum sealed, and they were designed as highly controllable death traps.
Okay, let's just analyze that design for a second. Soundproofing in the 1890s wasn't simple. He would have had to use extremely dense materials, maybe layers of heavy plaster, to make sure no cries could be heard.
Exactly. And the level of control he had was meticulous. The rooms had controlled air inlets and outlets, all operated from hidden levers and panels that only Holmes could access,
So he could release sleeping gas or poison into the rooms while the guests slept.
ensuring a silent, unidentifiable death. We also know they were built-in compartments designed to store daggers and other small weapons, just in case.
And the second floor was pure chaos. A maze of strange angled walls, dummy doors that opened into brick, stairs that led nowhere.
Pure disorientation. Only he could navigate it easily. But the true engineering horror was the disposal mechanism.
The chute system.
Yeah, the chutes. After a guest was killed or knocked out, Holmes would use a secret door or hidden panel right in the room itself and push the body down a custom-built hidden chute.
And because of how he'd planned the architecture, it delivered the body silently, instantly.
Straight into the nerve center of the whole operation.
The basement. Describe what was down there, this human processing plant.
It was just horrifyingly practical. You had acid pits designed for quick body disposal, total destruction of evidence.
Wow.
There were large, dedicated dissection tables. Sources even note he used tools left over from construction like oversized knives and saws to methodically dismantle the bodies.
And a large furnace, a cremation area. It sounds like he wasn't just killing, he was mass-producing raw material.
That's the economic insight. He stored what was valuable and he destroyed the rest, which leads to probably the most bizarre architectural detail in the sources.
The rectangular coffin-shaped compartments. Tell us about those.
The floors and even the walls of certain rooms, including the basement, were built with these sections that could be pulled up like large boxes or lids. These weren't just trapdoors, they were custom-built storage compartments.
So a tourist could be sleeping right above one or walking next to one and have no idea the floor was designed to secretly store or move a body.
Or even individual body parts. And the motivation, ultimately, it just circled right back to profit. He sold the skeletons and any remaining body parts directly to colleges for use in their anatomical experiments. He was treating human life as a commodity.
And as the World's Fair approached in 1893, that commodity stream turned into a flood.
Millions of people poured into Chicago, giving Holmes this enormous, transient, anonymous supply of potential victims, all lured in by his cheap hotel.
And his primary targets were the most vulnerable. He would advertise for female workers, offering a room and good pay.
But the horrifying catch was the mandatory requirement. They had to take out a life insurance policy with him as the sole beneficiary.
And we actually know the names of some of the people caught in his web.
We do. There was Julia, a jewelry counter worker. She was having an affair with him and became pregnant. After her husband left town, Julia just vanished. Later, police would find a body matching the height of her daughter, Pearl, on the property.
There was Emily Grant. She disappeared shortly after making the mistake of proposing marriage to him.
And Minnie Williams, an actress he charmed into working as a stenographer. Holmes convinced her to sign over her large Texas property, which happened to be tax delinquent, to an alias he controlled, a man named Alexander Bourne.
And then she disappeared immediately after.
Immediately. The sheer volume of these disappearances and the suspicious insurance claims eventually caught the attention of both the police and the insurance companies. In 1894, he was briefly arrested on arson charges.
And it was while he was in jail that he met Marion Hedgepeth, a cellmate who provided that final fatal connection.
Yes, Holmes planned this massive, elaborate insurance fraud scheme. Initially, it involved faking his own death, but he quickly pivoted and convinced his best friend, a man named Benjamin Petetzel, to fake his death for a $10,000 payout.
The plan was for them to split the profits.
But that was the ultimate act of betrayal. Instead of faking Petetzel's death, Holmes just murdered him with chloroform.
And then partially burned the body.
Just enough to guarantee it was unidentifiable, but still convincing enough for the insurance company to confirm the death. Holmes collected the entire $10,000.
And the depravity just escalated from there. He then convinced Petetzel's wife, who had no idea what happened, to let him take her 3 children, Howard, Nellie, and Alice.
He claimed he was going to reunite them with their father, who was supposedly in hiding.
Instead, he took them on this months-long journey across the Midwest, Indianapolis, Toronto, always staying one step ahead of their mother.
And eventually, Holmes murdered all 3 Petetzel's children in a series of just horrific acts, disposing of their bodies in separate locations to make the search almost impossible.
It was his old cellmate, Marion Hedgepeth, who was expecting a cut from that original fraud plan, who finally tipped off the authorities.
Hedgepeth suspected the potential death wasn't an accident, and that tip is what ultimately led police to track Holmes down.
He was arrested in Boston in 1895.
Yeah, and he was tried only for the murder of Benjamin Petetzel, just due to the complexity of linking him to all the Chicago victims. He was found guilty, sentenced to be hanged.
And later, he did confess to murdering the Petetzel children.
He did, possibly out of some final, strange flash of guilt. But even facing the gallows, the con man in him was still running the show. He sold his confession to a newspaper for a massive sum, $7,500.
And in it, he claimed he was responsible for 27 murders across Chicago, Indianapolis, and Toronto.
But he later admitted to the police that the number itself was a lie. He said he was conning everyone right until the very end. The truth is, the actual victim count of the murder castle is completely unknown.
H.H. Holmes was hanged on May 7, 1896, at Moyamensing Prison. And our sources describe him as calm and collected right up until the moment the floor dropped.
So if you look at the whole picture, from the abused boy with the skeleton, to the student monetizing dead bodies, to the architect of this perfect killing machine, the key takeaway is the sheer depth of calculated planning.
He wasn't a killer driven by rage or impulse. He was a meticulous, goal-oriented architect of death. He blended complex fraud with anatomy and structural engineering.
The true horror is just analyzing how that specialized knowledge, medicine, architecture, insurance law was systematically and so cold-bloodedly weaponized for personal gain. It wasn't just a house. It was a business plan, executed with concrete and chloroform.
And because we know he was still lying on the gallows, and that the real number of victims is lost to history, it leaves us with this ultimate provocative question.
Right. Did he die proud of the deadly, perfect design of his murder castle, the ultimate symbol of his criminal genius? Or in his final moments, did the structure he built for pure evil become his own personal, haunting nightmare?
That secret died with H.H. Holmes. We appreciate you joining us on this deep dive. Keep loved ones close.
See you next time with another story in Deep Dive.